A little bit more recent, if you've seen How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days with Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey, when she's wearing that gorgeous yellow gown with the Isidore necklace, those are the stairs that she comes running down when she's leaving. They didn't film inside, but they used the exterior as the building. The 4 statues out front are called the continents. The same guy that did Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial, Daniel Chester French, he also did these. Clearly, he can only do people sitting down. But on your far left, we have Asia represented. Then to the left of the steps is the Americas. To the right of the steps, we have Europe and the UK. And then over on the far right, that is Africa represented. You can even see the Sphinx head underneath her right arm there. Now, right behind me, this is Bowling Green Park. This is the first established park in New York City, established in 1733. However, even when the Dutch were here and they came here in the 1600s, this was always a common gathering ground. It just became official in 1733. Act repeal, and it was to protect an equestrian statue of King George III, right in the middle of where that fountain is, that kind of where you see that box in the round structure. But on July 9th, 1776, George Washington read the Declaration of Independence to the Sons of Liberty up where City Hall Park is now. And they were so excited. However, this is the 3rd church building. The original one burned down during the Revolutionary War. And then the second one in the early 1830s, there was a huge blizzard and it did so much damage to the church that they were like, scrap it, let's start again. So this one was completed in 1846. Richard Upjohn was the architect. And Trinity is one of the wealthiest parishes here in New York City. They own a lot of land and a lot of businesses lease their land from them, and they don't have to pay any property taxes. But the outside of this is covered in a very cheaply quarried stone called brownstone. And the parishioners were very confused. They were like, why are we using such a cheap stone when we have the money to go ornate with marble? But Richard Upjohn was a very humble architect. He wanted it to blend in with nature and be a nod to England. This is an Episcopal church, which is an offshoot of an Anglican. So once he made that explanation, then the parishioners were like, well, if it's good. Rectangles that ladies are standing on right here. This is where the wall stood. It's not the remnant of the wall, but it is where it stood. And it went from Trinity all the way over to the water's edge. So when the Dutch first came here, this was the northernmost part of their town, and this wall was erected as a northern defense to keep out the original inhabitants of the island, the Lenape tribe, and also to keep out the British. But I was talking to some of you earlier about the oysters that we had in our harbor, and the Lenape would always walk down tree and signed an agreement that they'd only trade with each other and they'd only take a small percentage of the commission. They called it the Buttonwood Agreement because it was under a buttonwood tree that they signed it. They started trading in a place called Tontine Coffee House. They moved several times. This building was built in 1903 and they have been in there ever since. However, even prior to the pandemic, with everything happening online these days, there's not a whole lot that happens on the trading floor anymore. So give it another 5 or 10 years and they'll probably turn that into a museum or maybe even news broadcasting. This is Federal Hall National Memorial. This is not the original building on its site. This one was built in 1842. But the building on the site prior was the City Hall for the British during the Revolutionary War. And after we won, right where you see George standing, that's the approximate location of where he stood on the balcony and was sworn in as our first president. And then it became Federal Hall. For the first year, this was our capital. Many people either don't know that or they forget that. But this is where it all began. We're walking the very streets that George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson, they've all walked these streets. And I think that's really cool. And on this site is where the Bill of Rights were written and read, the beginning of our Constitution, our judicial and legislative systems, all right here. But I'm really glad they decided to move our political seat. Because if we'd become the political and the financial seat here, we'd be crazier here than we already are. Of the World Fine Dining Restaurant, both of which giving you a 360-degree view of Lower Manhattan. And underneath the two towers was the largest underground mall that the city had. However, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, 4 planes heading to California were taken over because they were heavily fueled. At 8:46 in the morning, the North Tower was struck. At 9:03, the South Tower was struck. Within 50 minutes, the South Tower collapsed. And by 10:28, the North Tower collapsed. Now, most people think it was just those 2 buildings because that's what they associated with the skyline. But the World Trade Center complex was 7 buildings total. 1, 2, and 7 completely collapsed. 3, 4, 5, and 6 were so badly damaged that they had to be torn down. In addition, 2 other buildings and a church. So 10 buildings total on this 16-acre complex were completely lost. But that doesn't even count the damage of what you're gonna see. So to give you an idea of how much was affected, it's all the area that is shaded. So the darker the shading, this is where the heaviest damage was. This lighter shading, basically where we've been walking this afternoon, they were cleaning layers of thick dust for like months, like 8, 9 months after the fact. It took 8 months alone just to clear this area before they could even begin to think how we were going to rebuild. However, now what we have is an entirely different kind of tourist attraction. Now obviously this is a rendition because there's a building in this picture that we don't have standing right now. So we actually walked along 4 World Trade Center, which was the one over on the corner, and that one was completed in 2013. Right behind you, this is 3 World. We'll be able to see those a little better inside the memorial site. But this one has been open since 2018. Then, of course, we have the Oculus. And if you look through and you see those colorful buildings just on the other side through the glass, that is where 2 is supposed to go. And 2, we don't have an anchor tenant, so we don't want to build until we have an anchor tenant to cover those costs.
പൂവ് വെച്ചേക്കുന്നു അയാളുടെ ബർത്ത്ഡേ ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു